I've been so excited about this conversation, looking forward to it for days, for a couple of reasons. The first is like this is a rare occasion for cross-disciplinary conversation, something that I don't get to have very often in my world of music. And second, I know that after talking with you, I'm going to actually view my music differently. I'm going to see it and hear it differently because of what you've shared. And so I look forward to learning from you.
Thank you. I look forward to having this conversation and learning as well.
Well, I have to tell you, your book, Mathematics for Human Flourishing, elicited a very human response in me, something that I really didn't expect. And for you to have shared something so paradigm shifting, to view math in such a different way, in a way that reaches sort of with tentacles to so many different areas of life and connects our experiences, sort of bringing forth some universal truths. I had to wonder what kind of personal experiences inspired this book. So I'm wondering if we could start off by sort of having you describe your own personal journey with math.
Sure, yeah, be happy to. I guess I have been interested in math since I was a kid, and I was fortunate because I had parents um, who knew how to get me curious about things, and they had friends who introduced me to math at a early age. And I think maybe one of the first experiences that I had that convinced me that math was interesting and worth looking at was somebody who shared it might be an apocryphal story of Gauss as a kid. Basically, this friend asked me to sum the numbers from 1 to 100 and asked me if I could do it quickly, right? And of course, I had no idea how to do this. But when he explained how Gauss supposedly did it, I was amazed, right? It was basically, I'll tell you how it goes if you're not familiar with it, if our audience members aren't. Gauss basically looked at the sequence of numbers, 1, 2, 3, up through 100, and realized that if you pair them off, first and last, the 100 and the 1 together make 101. The 2 and the 99 together make 101. The 3 and the 98 together make 101. You end up with 50 pairs of 101. And so you can immediately see 50 times 101 is 5,050. And I remember thinking to myself, oh my gosh, that is really cool. That's really neat. And it convinced me that there was something interesting about thinking mathematically that I wanted to try to understand. So that's probably how I got started. I was fortunate, basically, and of course, I'm interested in more people getting excited about math. But another formative experience for me was, over time, doing more and more math, you begin to get recognized for it. You begin to, people begin to praise you for it, and that, in some ways, was detrimental to my progress because when I got to graduate school, I met people who were supremely talented in math, much more talented than I was, and that was the first place that I really struggled with my identity as a mathematician. Right? It made me question if I was doing math for the right reasons, because I was no longer the best at what I thought I was good at, and much of my identity had come from thinking that I was the best, and then coming face to face with the fact that I'm not. And so that was sort of an experience of failure that caused me to think about math differently.
Hmm. Maybe not a failure, but like a disruptor, right? A disruptor that
A
opens.
disruptor. But I actually came pretty close to leaving Harvard as a graduate student, because I had my research project wasn't going well, and I felt like a failure. And in fact, a professor basically said to me I didn't have what it takes to be a successful mathematician, and my whole um, uh, sense of myself, I think, was shot by that remark, and that's when I started thinking about doing something else. Seriously, thinking about quitting.
Hmm. but instead it yielded great gifting to all of us because you've actually opened our eyes to new ways of viewing math through your book, for which I am deeply grateful. Um, I wanted to sort of uh, share this quote of yours in the final chapter of your book. You said, "Doing math is tightly bound to being human." And as I read your book, I was sort of drawn into it, your message intellectually, emotionally, morally. I mean, it just resonated in so many different ways. Um, and so I wanted to give you this opportunity to share, you know, in some detail, what the book is about, to introduce us to the important figures that you share the stage with in the book, and to give us more detail about your thinking.
Sure. Yeah. I guess there are two ways that I like to speak about the book. One of them is sort of description of the purposes of the book. I mean, I like to say that the book is an inclusive vision of what math is, who it's for, and why anyone should learn it. And part of the message there is that math, people often think of math as just a bunch of computations or skills that you learn, algorithms that you learn to do certain things. And I want to say that math is a lot bigger than that. I want people to think of math as actually building in us virtues, things like curiosity and persistence and imagination. And these are all things that are that stick with us no matter what profession we go into, right? So this is actually a better reason to the better answer to the question, why do math? Uh, why do I need to learn this stuff? I mean, that's a question that most of us had asked at some point or another when we're learning things that we think are feel tedious and boring. And I guess part of the reason I wrote the book was to help open up people's minds about what it is that we're actually doing when we teach math and when we learn math. And so, that's one way I like to describe the book, and that's usually for someone who's interested in learning math or teaching math.
Mhm.
But you know what? The funny thing is that when the book came out, and I went to the local bookstore and actually saw it on the shelf the very first weekend it was out. I was like, oh my gosh, the book's there. There was somebody standing nearby who said, "Oh, what's your book about?" And I go into this explanation that I just gave you, and my wife afterwards, she sort of kicks me and nudges me in the side. She said, that really wasn't a really good answer. She said, "You should talk about the stories."
Yeah.
And of course, part of what I do in the book is tell lots of stories, right? That's in fact part of the message of the book is that math actually, when taught properly, is storytelling. And so the other way that I now, because of my wife, answer that question is I say basically the book's centered around three stories. It's a story of Simone Weil, who is a French religious mystic, but whose older brother was one of the most famous mathematicians of all time. And she felt small compared to her brother in her mathematical abilities. The second story is my own story in various hardships that I encountered and sort of crisis of self-confidence in mathematics, which is a very common experience that people hit it at different stages.
Mhm.
And then the third story is that of Christopher Jackson, an incarcerated man who wrote to me out of the blue 7 years ago, and we started a long correspondence. And he is a contributor to the book. He's contributed letters and a good friend now. And the book isn't really about me teaching Chris math. It's really a story about what Chris taught me as a professional mathematician about how I might even think about my own subject differently.
Mhm. Yeah, I found Christopher Jackson's story very compelling. Um, and it made me think, like, there are so many other Christopher Jacksons out there. He happened, even though he's incarcerated, it struck me, he sort of was experiencing this kind of euphoria and joy through math that almost freed him from his physical environment, right? He
Mm,
was able to travel places through math exploration. That
yeah.
was quite wonderful. Um, and so you think about all the others who are in the same situation who would benefit from that kind of exploration. So
Yeah.
thank you. Sir. for raising the importance of math in that way, that it could be enjoyed.
Yeah, one of the things that people. So I'll just say a little bit Christopher's story for the benefit of our audience. He's basically committed a series of crimes as a teenager, and since he was a teen, he's been in now prison for 14 years, and uh, this is the 14th year of a 32-year sentence. So he's going to be in for a long time. And um, part of the question that the book opens with is, why is Christopher sitting in a cell learning calculus that he'll most likely not use as a free man, and at least for many more years, right? Well, why is he doing that? And that's sort of the big challenge for us all. And when I say that, people often say, "Whoa, you found like somebody who's really gifted at math, and like he's sort of some sort of diamond in the rough." And of course, Christopher is a diamond. He's a gem. He has been gifted uniquely in various ways, and all of the ways that we find that we have inclinations and propensities. But to say that I discovered, or we did, that he's a discovery that many of us have, because they've been overlooked. And so that is part of the message of this book is basically, hey, look at all the human potential that's out there, and how can we see that in each other?
Right. So who's your audience as you write this book? Who are you addressing this message to? I would imagine there are multiple audiences. Can you sort of share who they are?
Yeah, it was a hard process to try to write this book because on one hand I was trying to speak to people who have had really bad experiences in math,
Hmm.
sometimes even harmed by their experiences, or their confidence has been shaken. On the other hand, they're professional mathematicians and math teachers that I wanted to speak to. And unfortunately, it's not uncommon to find mathematicians who have a very elite view of math, because we've been successful at this, and it's a sign, it's a badge of a stamp of self-importance in some ways, and so uh, it's in some ways to our own advantage to keep thinking of math as something that only the elite can do. And so I was trying to speak to those people as well. And at the same time, I was also trying to open up a larger conversation about the broader purposes of mathematics, the meaning behind what we're doing, and calling all of us to think a little more deeply about what our deep human desires are, what our longings are, and how math might and should meet those desires.
Has the response, or have the responses to the book been generally very supportive? I would imagine it, sort of, you've probably encountered mostly supportive, encouraging responses, but are there some challenging responses as well? Because you're shaking up the status quo here, brother.
Yeah, yeah. I the 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 genesis of the book came out of a speech that I gave to a large number of mathematicians at a math conference at the end of your term as president of the math association. You're asked to give a talk, and so this was a talk that I gave, and part of what I was trying to do is to call us all to think deeply about the bigger purposes of math education. And by and large, the response was very, very positive. But I did have one person come up to me after the talk, and walked straight up to me, and to my face, he said, sort of angrily, I really disagree with everything you said in that talk.
Hmm.
And it kind of took me aback, because I wasn't sort of expecting that kind of strong venom, at least not immediately. And so I said, well, I'd be interested in hearing more about what what you thought. And he said, I don't have time. I have to go. And he sort of just walked off, sort of like in a huff, right? And um, I think one thing that's hard is that when we're challenged to broaden our scope of who can do mathematics, it can be threatening. And in some ways, I think that's how he reacted.
Hmm. So interesting. Because when I think about math and sort of what you share, you have this whole chapter on beauty. And I sort of wanted to make an opportunity for us to talk about beauty in the context of math and music. Um, these beauty elicits a sort of affective response in all of us, right? And so I wanted to perhaps use this as a transition to the chapter that you wrote on music, math and beauty. Um, and wanted to put this out there, this whole idea of math as metaphor, um, as music is metaphor for something, a metaphor for truth, something transcendent, and just sort of use that as a lead in to that
Mm.
discussion of that chapter.
Yeah, I mean, math certainly has an ineffable quality for those who are able to experience it. I actually thought I would prepare some slides on beauty, so I'm going to share some here
Oh, yeah.
to try to give people a sense of what mathematical beauty is, especially if you haven't had a taste of it. And I think you, Mia, are going to see many ways in which it's very similar to an appreciation for musical beauty. So there's a quote that I like, really like, which I opened the beauty chapter with, and this is the quote by David Blackwell, who says this about mathematical beauty. He says, "Why do you want to share something beautiful with somebody else? It's because of the pleasure she will get, and in transmitting it, you appreciate its beauty all over again." And I really love uh, this this quote because it really captures, I think, what we do a lot. Like, if we're sitting together, uh listening, going to a concert, like it might be a concert that I've heard that music before. Like, why am I sitting through this concert again? Or why am I watching this movie over and over again?
Mhm.
And Well, you do it because you want to experience the beauty that you felt the very first time that you saw it, right? And I think he really captures this quite well.
Hmm.
And this is a little bit of artwork from the book. Carl Olson is a good friend who uh, who did a number of chapter opening pieces to try to. And my goal here was to try to make a book about math feel human, and I think he really did a good job in accomplishing that by drawing this picture. And I love this picture because you see a figure reflecting on something beautiful, and this is actually a mathematical object known as a Sierpinski triangle, and I love it because he made it look like stained glass art that you might find, for instance, in a cathedral.
Hmm.
And what are we tempted to do? We're tempted just to sit there and reflect, which is really, I think, amazing. And that's what happens when you encounter mathematical beauty, mathematics that seems really that sort of captures your imagination. So I thought, as an exercise for our audience, I would have you look at a piece of artwork and and just reflect on this piece of artwork. This is a piece of art that I only recently became aware of. It's called Hope by George Frederick Watts. It was actually popular art around the turn of the last turn of the century, before the one we just experienced, 1886. And I invite you just to take a moment to view it and ask yourself, what do you notice? And what do you wonder?
Hmm. Well, she doesn't, if it's a she, does not look very hopeful. And she's holding a lyre.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Some
That
music there, a musical instrument.
instrument, yep, that I can't tell, but I think it doesn't have many strings.
Yeah, right. Right. So something uh, interesting is happening as we experience this art together. You're asking questions about what's going on and why is this element there. right? And so I'll just for your benefit, I'll zoom in on the picture. Maybe you can see it a little more clearly.
Mhm.
Definitely does not have many strings, does it?
Like one.
Yeah, a single string. Yeah, and she's sort of picking it in a forlorn way, right?
Mhm.
Like her hope is gone in some sense, or maybe she's holding on to hope, right? This is part of the questions that we ask when we look at this painting.
Mhm.
One of the things that then you do is you start asking yourself investigative questions, like I want to know more about this painting, right? We look at it and we're absorbed, we're fascinated. We look at the meaning behind the various elements here. We begin to place things in relationship to one another. After we eventually look hard enough, we might be uh, surprised to find things we didn't see before, right? All these happen for somebody who engages in mathematics the right way, right? To engage in mathematical beauty is to actually sit and ponder and to think, why is this here? What is the meaning? What are the meanings of all the things that are going on in this picture? And then occasionally you'll be surprised. Like for instance, there's actually, if you look at the very top here, you actually see a little star that is faint and out of view, and its rays are shining on this lady who sits atop this globe. And if you learn a little bit about the history, you'll find out that this is a painting that was basically expressing the mood of pessimism at the time. It's not unlike what's going on right now. There was a sort of major world recession, and there was a spirit of pessimism uh, at the time. And so this lady is sort of sitting atop maybe the burdens of the world, holding on to some kind of hope, and maybe out of her view she does not yet see, but there's a star that is shining, and maybe that's a symbol of hope.
Mm.
Martin Luther King actually used this picture, referred to this picture in one of his sermons called Shattered Dreams.
It's beautiful. So,
Yeah.
as you think about Christopher Jackson in prison, sort of how has the beauty of math given him hope?
Yeah, yeah, he would describe it as in some ways part of it is giving him goals to focus on and a way to free his mind, even if his body can't be free. Um, and I see that, over a progression of years now. He started by studying, algebra, like basic algebra text, right? He worked his way up through calculus, and at that point, that's when he wrote me and said, "Hey, I need help furthering my math education." And now he's sort of studying advanced textbooks, uh, and and he's engaging with ideas. That's one of the things I think he would say is he now lives in a world of ideas,
Hmm.
and uh, and that's one of the wonderful, most beautiful things about mathematics that fascinates him,
Mhm.
captivates him.
It's interesting because I feel like the world of ideas are just being drawn into a different headspace, a space that's not full of things to do or work that needs to be accomplished or tasks that need to be checked off a list. Um, there's something very deeply freeing for the imagination. You enter a completely different mental space, uh,
Yeah,
which we don't allow ourselves to enjoy very much in this day and age, right? With
yeah,
the busyness and the cacophony of our lives. For music
yes,
as well, it's the same thing. Musicians are constantly producing, right? We're not allowed to sort of
yes,
enjoy the art, even though we're supposed to be artists. And so,
yes.
an interesting irony. But go ahead. What is this image?
This is an image that's a more mathematical image, you might say. It's produced by my friend Frank Ferris. And it's, one of the first questions you ask about this picture is, how are these designs made, right? Why do we see these patterns? And, I could go into it, but I won't here, except just to say that these patterns reflect certain mathematical structures. In math, you can think of think about as the study of patterns in some ways, and that's part of what that discipline, sort of what produced this picture. Here's another picture you might look at and say, oh, something interesting is going on here. And part of what I want people to see is that, as you begin to become a mathematical thinker, it's hard to not look at any picture and ask yourself how these patterns in the rings are basically reflecting patterns in rational numbers. And I won't go into that here, except to say there's something amazing here that's going on. And opening up your eyes to mathematics is to say, what's the underlying structure? What's going on in this picture? And so you never just look at a picture and then move on. You actually look at the picture and say, what's going on? This is beautiful. Something amazing is happening. I talk about different kinds of beauty, right? So one type of beauty I talk about in the book is just the beauty of and patterns, immersive patterns, right? But then the next sort of level of beauty beyond that is to ask yourself what's going on with the patterns. And so then there's what I like to call wondrous beauty, right? The beauty of ideas. And to say that there's something interesting going on here is to say there's the ideas behind this are beautiful, right? Basically, this moon is exerting an influence on the rocks that form up the rings, and it's perturbing some of the rocks that are whose orbital periods are in exact rational ratios with this moon. Kind of like if you're on a swing and you push somebody in just the right way, they go higher. This moon is kind of pushing these rocks on a swing around their orbit, and when they do it in exactly the right way, it pushes those rocks out of their orbit. So you get these gaps, right? So there you're like, whoa, that's a beautiful idea. And we see the effects of that, right? So that's another kind of mathematical beauty. It's kind of like when I saw the idea of pairing up the 100 and the 1 and the 2 and the 99, you're like, whoa, oh my gosh. And part of what beauty does is it builds in us the virtue of reflection. It builds in us the virtue of looking for patterns where you don't expect to find them, right? It actually cultivates in us a disposition to more beauty. It helps us begin to think there's patterns everywhere, right? And we have habits of generalization. A deeper kind of beauty still is the beauty not just of ideas, but of reasoning. And I love this picture. There's lots of pictures like it. This is a picture that describes this identity. So it turns out if you add 1/4 and its powers, it sums to 1/3. Okay. And that may be a little surprising, like, why in the world is that true? But then if you look at this picture, you see that the colors in this left picture are basically 1/4 of the entire square. And if you just repeat this pattern at smaller scales inside the blank and empty fourth, then you get inside here, this little square is 1/4 times 1/4 in area. And it has a blank square. And if you repeat the pattern inside there, this is 1/4 times 1/4 times 1/4 in area. So you see that the red areas actually are the sum of the numbers on the left here, and they form exactly 1/3 of this square. And you can see why it's 1/3, because at every stage, at each of these L-shaped regions it takes up 1/3 of those regions. So that's like, whoa, that's actually kind of a beautiful proof, right? That's kind of beautiful demonstration that this idea is true. And so that's kind of like what I like to call the beauty of ideas, right? Wondrous beauty, and now, of course, I'm not even remembering how I called it in the book. In a sort of inspiring beauty. And so the thing that's kind of amazing is after you see these kinds of beauty, you're like, you might even achieve like even the more deep level of beauty, which is the idea that there's a transcendent beauty, right? A beauty just waiting to be found out there, and it leads you to look for patterns everywhere. And when you see a pattern, all over the place, you begin to get excited, right? You begin to say, whoa, that's like, it's almost like the universe is speaking to you, right? And that's it in some ways, that's the way people describe it, right? Or um, uh, the famous mathematician Paul Erdős actually had a phrase, was fond of saying, whenever you see a beautiful proof, it's actually belongs to the book. A certain, he called it the book that God keeps, and in which all the most beautiful theorems are kept,
Hmm.
right? Um,
You know, if I might jump in and just add Christopher Jackson's letter from August 9th, 2018, in your book, he said, I'd say I'm drawn to mathematics because of its strength, its structure, and its truth. To me, I've never seen an argument stronger than a mathematical argument. Its structure is amazing. The least being how you can come from a variety of valid methods and still lead to the absolute same conclusion.
mm, yeah,
And that's
yeah,
kind of transcendent beauty you're talking about.
yeah. And there's this, this amazing thing, like if you see a truth, like a mathematical truth, and then you read, you know, a paper, read some historical document where somebody came up with the same idea and they have the exact same reasoning. It's kind of like you're connected with this person across time, space, culture. It's kind of like, whoa, how is that possible that two people very, very different would come up upon the same truth, right? In some ways, it's very
Well,
uh,
so that leads me to another question, Francis. Before I want to also touch upon justice too, to move on to that and love. But is there an interpretive aspect to math? I mean, in the way that there is music, like you can have five pianists play a Beethoven sonata, and all five of them will sound completely different, even though the notes are the same, the rhythms are the same, the expressive markings are the same. But there's something in the spaces and the gaps and the relationships of these notes and rhythms that suddenly is different depending on the individual who is interpreting the piece. Is there something like that equivalent in math?
yeah. Yeah, in fact, there is, because when I go to a math talk, when I hear somebody lecture on a mathematical topic, I might know a lot about the topic, and yet I'm still interested in going to the talk because each person has a unique perspective on the truths that they're presenting, and they'll present it in a slightly different way than I would, and that kind of stuff I find fascinating. Yeah, certainly.
That's fantastic. So you like see it from through different eyes, right? A different
Yeah,
brain, if you will.
yeah,
Math is a language, after all, much like music, right? And so there's that element of expression
yeah,
and to your point, even affective response through
yeah.
aesthetics.
and,
Um,
and that points to its universality as well, right? Like if we say math is a language, then we shouldn't be saying some people are math people and some people aren't, right? We can all find ways of expressing ourselves musically, mathematically, and so that's sort of part of I think the justice angle of the book is to call people to think about math as something that's inherently human, and therefore all of us do in different ways.
mhm. Well, talk about how we use math in some ways to divide people rather than, or exclude people rather than, bringing them in to this discovery and exploration that you encourage.
Yeah. I mean, one way that happens, of course, is a certain elitism, feeling like, okay, I'm good at math, and therefore I'm going to lord it over other people, or I'm going to think of math as. I mean, we do this unconsciously, right? We say, "Oh, you're so good at math. I was never that good at math," right? Or something like that. And that's something I hear all the time, right? And in some ways, I joke that like being a mathematician is almost like being a priest, because when people find out what you do, they feel the need to confess, right? It's like confessing math sins, and part of that is I buy into it as well when I accept that kind of praise, right? Like it makes me feel good, and so there's elitism. But there are other things that we do that I think are really harmful, right? We start thinking about math as one dimensional, like it's only about being fast, when in fact for professional mathematicians it's not about being fast at all, right? It's about thinking about ideas deeply and slowly, in fact.
Mhm.
But we measure people by their performance in some ways, in some axis, number of papers, for professional mathematicians, the number of papers you've written, right? And that's really harmful. It's detrimental. And
Right.
I would love people to see math as much more multidimensional, right? It's growth in virtues, it's growth in creativity, it's growth in persistence, it's growth in a disposition to beautiful things. And when employers are looking for people to hire, they're hiring math majors not for specific skills like factoring polynomials. I mean, they're hiring people because they're going to be persistent in problem solving. They're going to look at a problem from many different angles, and those are all virtues. And so that's sort of the piece that I wish people would see, and in some ways that would help change the profession and make it more inclusive.
One of the themes that came up in your book that really resonated with me as a musician is this sort of professionalization of math or professionalization of music and the ways in which we, engage in these wonderful disciplines in the arts, even sports, for example, as a way of weeding out, as a way of identifying aptitudes and declaring, oh, you're worthy of going to college or you're worthy of taking on certain jobs. And instead of saying, what inherent value is there just to enjoy and pursue the discipline itself? What enrichment is there? And because we don't do that as a society, we're so utility focused, right? We miss out on the richness that these disciplines have to offer us.
Yes. Yeah. And when we see everything just for its utility and its value, it's in some ways uh, it it demeans the practice, right? You begin to just see the outputs rather than enjoying the process, the discipline for what it is, and the ways that it helps you grow as a human being, as someone who's a fully formed human who has a desire for meaning, right? Who has a spiritual side in some sense.
Mhm, mhm. Can you share some of the stories really briefly of injustice that you've come across in your experience as a teacher, as a colleague? Deeply personal stories of people being slighted in the field of math
Yeah,
because of the way people viewed them.
yeah. I mean, in some ways, the in the past, of course, there's been overt kinds of racism against people who we viewed as incapable of doing math. But I think these days it more comes in, often comes in the form of slights. And I have friends who are African American who are often mistaken for the help at conferences, right? The wait staff at conferences, and not to say that being a person who's serving is of less dignity at all. In fact, it shouldn't be. But part of what I think is hard about that experience is here's somebody who is worked to train well in some discipline and not being recognized for the professional strengths that they bring um, is it can be really uh, hurting, um, harmful.
And even as an Asian American, I can say sometimes, Asians are sort of cast as folks who are good at math, but not all of us are good at math. Uh,
Yes.
so, I am interested in math. I'm not great at math,
Yeah.
but can you speak to that as well? I mean, it seems these
Yeah.
prejudices and biases harm everyone.
Yeah, they harm Asians too, even though Asians are thought of as being good at math. And as you said, one of the problems is that you begin, if you feel like you are not performing in the ways that people expect, that can be harmful, and also actually probably detrimental, right? Like it's harder for someone to ask questions when they're expected to know something, right? Like, and so it can be harmful to one's own education to be in a place where you don't want to appear like you don't know what's going on. I mean, that's what happened when I got to Harvard. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm kind of behind everybody else here because they've all had graduate courses, and and so part of the much of the first year in grad school, I spent just being quiet. Like I didn't say anything in classes because I was too afraid to ask questions. At some point, I was like, this is not helping at all. I'm just going to be that one who asks who asks the question, like a stupid question.
Mhm.
And the surprising thing is, people came up to me afterwards and would say, I'm so glad you asked that question because I had that question too.
Yeah, yeah. Everyone's just afraid, right? To
Yeah,
come out and be honest and
yeah,
human, and
yeah,
therefore restricts them from learning and engaging the material, more
yeah,
deeply. It's
yeah.
so unfortunate.
It's unfortunate. And so this is why, when people think about math, we should think about math as exploring, right? It should be okay to brainstorm and not have well-formed ideas.
Hmm, hmm. Boy, as a product of our post-industrial, industrial era thinking, right? Everything is about productivity and monetization of skills and gifts and producing, right?
Yeah,
Results versus
yeah,
the richness of the pursuit itself.
yeah. And in some ways, the Christian faith has something to offer here as well, right? Like, I mean, there's the notion in the Christian tradition that that your dignity, you have an inherent dignity apart from anything that you do, or apart from how you perform morally or how you perform what you're able to produce. And I think that sort of deeply resonates as well as we think about our professions, as we think about the way society measures us by the things that we do.
Hmm.
Uh, it can be very helpful to be to receive that grace, the grace of having dignity and not needing to prove it or earn it in any way.
Earning it, yeah, that's really powerful. I mean, you have this quote um, by C.S. Lewis. You said, and of course, this is in a previous chapter, but you said he describes the experiences of beauty as the scent of a flower we have not found, the echo of a tune we have not heard, news from a country we have never visited. And as we look at other people, our desire, if it is to share beauty, is to share that with everyone unconditionally, right? These
Mhm.
beautiful metaphors that math is, that music is, for something greater than ourselves,
Yeah,
and to do so indiscriminately,
yeah,
generously, inclusively, right?
yes, yes.
Um, it's a very powerful, powerful message. So, I mean, in some, when you talk about math being about love, I mean, that is quite a stretch, Francis. Um, but if you wanted to sum it up all together, sort of theologically, mathematically, relationally, what would
Mhm.
you say? How do you say that these things are connected?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think when people read love as a title, the last chapter, the 13th chapter, they think, oh, is he going to talk about how people love math? Uh, and and that's exactly not what the chapter is about, right? I say that explicitly. Like, I'm not talking about loving math. I'm talking about how you love people because of math and through math. And so that I think the basic message there is we love people when we see the inherent potential in each person to think and reason mathematically. We love them when we believe that they can flourish in mathematics and in life. And that's and there's a difference between loving somebody conditionally and unconditionally there, right? There's the conditional love is looking at somebody who's already performing well and saying, you have potential, you should go to Harvard or MIT or Cornell or whatever it is, right? And then sort of discounting the Christopher Jacksons who end up in prison because of some mistakes he made as a teenager, and thinking they'll never amount to anything. That's conditional love, and unconditional love says, I see you, I believe you have potential, and I'm gonna I'm gonna sit with you here and be with you in this space, in this mathematical space.
Hmm. That's deeply convicting because it does challenge us the way that we view not only ourselves,
Yeah,
with regard to our sufficiencies or insufficiencies in math, but how we view others and
yeah,
judge others as, uh, worthy
mhm.
of a mathematical experience or a musical experience or not.
Yeah.
Um,
Our kids, how we view our kids if we have kids in the future.
wow, super powerful. Well, this has been really fun, Francis. And I think I just wanted to tell you that because of your book, just in wrapping up this conversation, I have begun to think about music and human flourishing. Um, and how I will view music in the context of society at large very differently, especially for those who are not who are underserved, who don't have the privilege and access to music. What would that look like? Providing that and pursuing that
Yeah.
um, as an end in and of itself,
Yeah.
generously sharing that art form. And so I will be thinking further about justice and love through the lens of music. So thank you for that. You've inspired me, and I'm sure you've inspired many in our audience to think about their own craft and disciplines in a new way.
Thank
So really deeply appreciative. And I know we are now supposed to move on to Q&A session. And I have the first question for you. Why is it that math education for most people makes us miss the beauty in math?
Yeah, that's a large question, and I'll just try to answer briefly so we can get to as many questions as we can. But I would say one of the reasons is that we think of math as only skills and don't think of it as the virtues that we're building. Uh, and so an emphasis on skills, on algorithm, on performance, on memorizing and computing things, but not understanding and in fact enjoying and understanding the meaning behind what we're learning,
Mm,
I think contributes to a lot of the antipathy that people have towards math because it doesn't feel like freedom if you are being told to memorize things without understanding things.
right.
And that's not to say that you shouldn't learn to memorize things that I think are you'll find useful in the future. But that's not mathematics. Math is part of what is understanding, right? It's like saying, I'm going to learn music by making people learn scales. And yeah, scales are going to be important if you're going to be technically proficient. Uh, but that's not where you start, right? If you're going to teach somebody music, you're going to expose them to beautiful pieces of music, just like I would expose kids to beautiful ideas.
Hmm. Actually, that reminds me of an experience my own son had. He's very good at math, but he never liked it until he came home from school one day. I picked him up from school one day, and he was so jazzed because he'd been introduced to Mandelbrot's set
Um,
and how such a simple equation could generate such a complex geometric configuration.
yeah,
And just the iterations of that, equation, plugging in different numbers would actually exclude certain areas and include some. And then it created these beautiful shapes. And he's like, he all of a sudden, that sort of transcendent beauty, it hit him. And now his attitude toward math is completely different.
yeah, that's wonderful, and it's wonderful when we have people who are able to bring that beauty to young kids.
Hmm. Well, I have another question here. How do we make time to explore ideas while at such a checklist focused place as college?
Yeah, that's a great question, and not only that, but also in high school. I mean, one of the there's a lot of great things about the Common Core state standards, which or things like it, which exist in other states that don't have the Common Core. But one of the criticisms at the high school level is that there's just like a whole bunch of standards to get through, and one of the trends right now is to try to help teachers understand the coherence between some of the ideas so that when you present an idea you can see how it fits, how its meaning fits into the larger picture, how that idea might begin to show up in over and over again later on in your career will help you teach it right now to the kids that you have.
Mhm.
And so that's something people are devoting a lot of thought to. I mean, personally, as a math educator, I worry less about how much I cover and more about making sure students enjoy what they're learning.
Mhm.
And part of the reason is I know that if they really enjoy what they're learning, they're going to be motivated to learn about these things that I don't have time to cover later on. I might just whet their appetite or make them curious about them.
They'll pursue it in the off hours, right? Yeah. Okay. Next question is: does math relate to religion? If so, how and in what ways does math lead us to the all powerful one?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. I mentioned Paul Erdős and the book of all the greatest proofs ever that he posited existed, and To my knowledge, he didn't have any religious faith at all. And in fact, he said, you don't have to believe in God, but you should believe in the book. And one of the reasons I think about that quote of his is basically, in some ways, when you have a transcendent mathematical experience, you can't help but have the feeling like you're uncovering something that is universal in some ways, and beautiful, and whether or not you have any religious faith at all, often people who are drawn to mathematics are drawn because of its beauty, and there's something transcendent about that. And now, that being said, I think that there are many parallels between the way people pursue math and pursue religious faith. And one of there are many different ways, right? Like one is an understanding of the infinite, right? And in some ways, being a mathematician, when I think about the infinite, that means something to me that's a lot different than what it necessarily means to the average person who doesn't have a math training. But in some ways, it informs the way that I think about, when I hear people talk about God as being the God of the infinite. My mathematical training actually helps me appreciate how wonderful and marvelous and beautiful that and deep that idea is, and how rich that idea is. So in some ways, I think math might inform my faith, and in some ways, faith might inform the way I think about mathematics. Right? Not every mathematician would necessarily uh, uh, they might appreciate the beauty of math, but in some ways, it can fall into just a worship of mathematics itself, right?
Right.
Like, saying this is the ultimate thing that's going to solve every human problem. And of course, I don't believe that. I don't think math and is going to solve every human problem, but it does contribute in wonderful ways to a life well lived, and one that is able to, I think, help us appreciate our spiritual side, even if we're not spiritual.
Mhm. Do you think also, I mean, it's not just about math, right? Because what we live in a hyper specialized time, right? I mean, everyone is plumbing deep but narrow. But as we sort of have cross-disciplinary conversations and start to see sort of recurring themes or patterns, if you will, transcendent experiences through these different modalities and languages,
Mm,
start to see sort of an overarching theme, right, that
yeah,
connects all of these disciplines.
yeah,
So I love this quote by Keats, Ode on a Grecian Urn. He ends with this quote: "Beauty is truth, and truth is beauty." And then he goes on to say, "That's all you need to know." And sort of this interchangeability. We don't think that way, in our sort of contemporary time, right? There's like truth, and then there's beauty, but the connection of these two, that there's this whole spectrum, right? This
mhm,
gradient, and that's how I think of all the disciplines, right? Whether it's
yeah,
from mathematical truth to the beauty of music.
yeah. Yeah, and in some ways, people argue when I talk about the virtues that are built by mathematics, and I'll say, the pursuit of mathematics builds creativity and curiosity and things like that, and they'll say, well, that's not unique to math, and then, I say that's exactly my point. Like, yes, mathematics builds, I think, a very special kind of creativity, and a special kind of curiosity. But certainly, the wealth of ways in which we can understand the world that have been given to us, and I believe as a person of faith, have been given to us by God, I think help us understand the larger meaning of the world that we inhabit, and ways to think about it. A certain um, coherency to the way that I think about math, I think lends itself to when I look at music, when I look at art, uh, and try to assimilate its deeper meaning.
Oh, so good. Um, so here's another question. I hope you can share the metaphor of the secret menu at Chinese restaurants, because I find that metaphor so powerful.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, that's an example I use in the book. This person's referring to the secret menu, and I actually I like this metaphor because it's something that's I experience all the time because I'm Asian American. And when I go into a Chinese restaurant, unlike in the regular world where people often don't think of me as American, when I go to a Chinese restaurant, they don't think of me as Asian, right? So I sort of get it from the other side, right? Like uh, this experience that, oh, you must not really like Chinese food, right? So uh, because I speak perfect English, they think I was born in the U.S. and that I must not like Chinese food. So the thing that happens there is it's often kind of a reverse. Racism is too strong a word, but it's just a reverse assumption that they're making. And at Chinese restaurants, there's often a secret menu where they keep all the good stuff. Like it's all the stuff that's actually the good stuff. And the regular menu is filled with Americanized dishes that are catered to the American palate, right? And so I go into the restaurant and I don't get the secret menu because unless I go with somebody who speaks Chinese fluently. And so uh, this metaphor I use because this is exactly what happens in mathematics, right? We show some people the secret menu, and then to others we say, "Oh, no, 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 you won't like that stuff on that menu,"
Right.
right? We say that often to women and girls, "Oh, no, 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 you shouldn't go into a STEM profession because that subject's for boys." Or I was never good at math, and therefore you don't have the genes either, as if there is a math gene, which I don't believe there is. Everybody can have meaningful mathematical experiences in learning the language of mathematics. And so that's the secret menu. It's I think it's I think it's a helpful way for us to check ourselves and say, are we just showing the secret menu to certain people that we expect to do well in math,
Yeah. Based on assumptions.
based on assumptions that we inadvertently make? Sometimes they're well-meaning, but they can be harmful.
Hmm. Do you think of mathematics as in some way socially constructed or instead discovered? Or another way to ask, are you a Platonist about mathematics?
Yeah, yeah. That is often a question people ask: is math invented or discovered? And I would say it's both. Like I think of mathematics as something that I am uncovering because I might have exactly the same thoughts as someone had 400 years ago, and so in some sense that's the Platonic ideal that math exists independent of ourselves. But there's also the aspect of me creating the mathematics that I'm doing. It is constructed. I make choices about what definitions are interesting and important, and I pursue the consequences of those studying those concepts. And so there's in some ways, I'm co-creating, right? That's sort of, to borrow some theological language, is I'm co-creating mathematics, which already existed before me, but yet somehow I am inhabiting this mode of engaging with the world. And I think that's what happens, in all our lives, in some sense, right? There's this underlying reality for people of faith. We feel that there's an underlying reality that existed before us, continues through us and after us, and yet we are participating in it with real agency, and it's part of the richness of what it means to live life.
Mm. Okay, so next question. What characteristics of God do you see reflected in mathematics?
Orderliness, uh, a love of beauty, um, a an interest in patterns, deep complexity and richness. Um, there's no end to, you see a very simple idea in math, and then you realize, oh my gosh, it's layered and layered and layered and layered, and that's I think reflects in my own opinion something of God's character.
Is there an equivalent to like consonance and dissonance in mathematics? Uh, Things that really resonate naturally, aesthetically and otherwise with people, and other math concepts that are sort of off-putting?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I'm trying to think of examples, and I'm sure I've had them where I encounter an idea or concept that feels really unnatural and ugly, and but then I realize it has its purpose, right? So in some ways, it's kind of like the tension and resolution that you know when you in music where you have this chord that sounds really funny and then it resolves really nicely. In some ways, when you're trying to construct an argument to prove an idea,
Mhm.
uh, the idea itself might be really beautiful, but the route to get there sometimes can be ugly in some sense,
Hmm.
and yet necessary in some ways. And so
Wow.
I certainly had that experience in mathematics. I've never thought about that before. That's a really good one.
Well, it's sort of the sum total of that is the human experience, right? Um, Whether it's dark, light, sort of the symbiosis, this complementary experience, right, of consonance, dissonance, whether it's evil and good, darkness and light. It's all part of the package in mathematics as well, it sounds like, as it is in music, which
Yeah.
translates the message,
Yeah,
which,
I'm just thinking about this here as being, the whole part of the package. I think one thing that I maybe wanted to say to that question that just a while ago about what other qualities of God do I see reflected in math. I guess as I'm trying to encourage, I want us to see math as more than just the actual subject itself, but also the set of practices, the ways we interact with one another, the ways we love each other, the ways we experience deep human desires like freedom and community um, and beauty and truth and meaning. These are all chapter titles from the book. These are all things that I want people to associate with math as well. And so, in some sense, if I think about this richer and larger sense of mathematics, I see uh, God in that as well, in the desire for community and the desire to have rich ways of knowing one another through doing math together.
beautiful. It says, let's say, I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions. Many of the examples cited for beauty have specific symmetry or patterning. What about the absence of pattern and or symmetry? Is that different beauty?
Yeah. Yeah, another thing that I like to challenge people is your notion of mathematical beauty going to be the same as someone else's, right? And so if you're a teacher, maybe what appeals to you isn't what appeals to other people. There are people who study the lack of symmetry and lack of order, and I'm sure they find that beautiful for reasons that are quite different. There are people who do applied mathematics and study and model things and find that process of modeling itself, creating a model to try to understand the world. Think about the pandemic and all the models that are going into understanding the spread of disease. Those I think are really beautiful, but in a different way. It's a beauty of of modeling the world and trying to explain it.
Mhm. Okay, and then finally, your last question. Tell us what we should read after Mathematics for Human Flourishing.
Whoa. Yeah. What should you read? Gosh. Well, there's lots of great books there. I guess they're asking for a math book, maybe a book about math.
Probably along the same lines.
Uh, Gosh, now you're putting me on the spot here. What should they read? Well, let's see. So for this crowd, it's not a book, but there's a speech given 100 years ago by another president of the Mathematical Association of America um, that that talks about parallels between the pursuit of math and the pursuit of religious faith, and that's called Religio Mathematici, which you can probably find online in some form. That's I think going to appeal to those of you who have a come from a background of some particular, not necessarily Christian faith, but some religious faith, or at least believing that there's something deeper to be understood in the world. I think people would enjoy that. There's lots of great popular books out there that that I could could name. that sort of help people understand the beauty of math. I grew up studying, reading books by Martin Gardner, who has a whole collection of books, and they're sort of puzzle books or ideas about math that I think are really beautiful. And you can find a lot of those books really cheaply now, and worth looking at. There's a recent book by a mathematician called How to Free Your Inner Mathematician, Susan D'Agostino, and so she talks a bit about how about what mathematical thinking feels like and looks like, and I think that that book could appeal to a number of people who are interested in doing a little more math as well.
Wonderful. Well, I just have a very, quick, simple question, and that is, how is Christopher Jackson doing right now in this time of COVID? Um, Obviously incarcerated, enjoying his math, but have you had recent communication with him?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, we're in communication through prison. The prison has a limited email system. It's not like email that he can email anybody, but I have to be approved and on a special list. And so I just spoke with him today. Actually, it's rough right now because in the prisons everybody is on top of one another, and COVID has made its way to the prison in various ways. He's escaped it so far. Uh, we're trying to use, so he's an official contributor to the book, and in fact he's getting a portion of the royalties, and so we're trying to help use the book to help him appeal for compassionate release during this time. Right now he has no chance of parole. The earliest that he could get out, even with good conduct, is 2033. But because of the First Step Act, which reduced sentences like the ones that he was convicted for, but not retroactively, if there were a Second Step Act, he would be free now because he's already served the 14 years necessary by the reduced prison sentence. And so he's filed a motion right now for compassionate release based on his rehabilitation and the sentencing disparity that came about because of the First Step Act. And so that's making its way through the court system right now, and we're hoping and praying that that will result in release. But it's hard, yeah, and um, yeah, it's hard. It's hard to it's hard to have hope, for him. And I guess one thing that I really hope is that we don't just continue to lock people away for small crimes, especially if if they committed them as teens.
Well, Francis, thank you so much. This has been such a rich conversation.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. It's been a delight and joy too.